Hey, ladies and gents, and welcome to the Controlled Interest Gamecast, episode 192. As always, I'm joined by Dom.
Praise the sun.
Praise the sun. I'm
Plenty
your
of sun
host,
today.
Jared Weich, and no Chris this week, but we do have a special guest, weekend staff writer over at DualShockers and co-host of the Mega 10 Marathon podcast, Alissa James.
Hello, how's everyone doing?
We're doing good. Thank you for coming on, especially this week of all weeks. We really appreciate you being able to come on. We've worked with DualShockers before, people from the site. We've had Logan Moore, who I believe now is the managing editor, I believe. Close friend of the show, has been on numerous times. We've also had Tanner Pierce on, so we're going to reach the point where we're going to get everybody from DualShockers on the podcast at some point, so we're really happy to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And for those listening, if for some reason you live in a bubble, obviously there's a lot of things currently going on in America specifically with Black rights and Black Lives Matter. And I want to be frank and upfront real quick that I actually wasn't sure if I wanted to do a podcast this week, just because I didn't know if it was, our place to put out something when there's a lot more important things happening. And I've had Alissa on I have this Rolodex of guests that I want to get on the podcast eventually. And I felt that instead of skipping a week of doing the podcast, that I could do the opposite of that and make sure I amplify Black voices and do my part. So I reached out to Alissa. She was kind enough to accept the invitation to come on. So, we're going to have some really cool topics. Going to be talking normal video game news, but we're going to have a couple of topics specifically talking about Black representation in video games. One of them, Alissa's topic specifically. So really happy to get into that. The other thing I wanted to mention before we get into the news, and Alissa and Dom, I want you guys to, after I'm done, if you guys want to say anything, please feel free. I just have a prepared message I wanted to read for everybody out there before we get into, the entertainment video game news stuff, because there's a lot more important stuff happening right now. So here it is. So despite the size of our platform, I felt we needed to do our part in amplifying Black voices, especially in the video game space, and especially this week. I'll make sure to do a better job on my end of making sure that I continue to help in shining a spotlight on Black creators and voices. Do your part and be the active change you want to see in the world. Whenever you protest, whether you protest, donate, or spread information and resources, above all else, listen. This isn't a week-long event. This is a day-to-day fight to combat injustice, systemic racism, and police brutality. Black lives matter because all lives matter, not in spite of them. Understand your privilege, acknowledge it, and empathize. I think it's important that as at the front of the podcast as opposed to the end. I think people need to hear that. So
That's pretty good.
I don't know if Alissa or Dom, you guys have anything you want to add or anything you want to specifically mention. But the floor is yours if you'd like to.
No, that was good, man. I don't think
That was excellent.
unique from that. So.
Okay. We're in tough times but important times, and video games are awesome, but they're not what's most important right now. So
Exactly.
on a lighter note, let's get into the video game news. So we have some interesting stuff here. Here's the thing, Alissa, is that we normally don't have people with your video game interests on the show. You're very much a JRPG person, and
Ooh.
that's something that's kind of a blank space for Dom and I. That's not a genre that we lean towards. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say throughout the show from your perspective, because it's a total blind spot for us when it comes to JRPGs. So the first bit of news here is interesting. So EA Access is headed to Steam. If you're not familiar, EA Access is EA's subscription service that allows gamers to get early access to games and play demos or full portions of the game, but for limited amounts of time. It was originally exclusive to the Xbox platform. Then in recent years, it came over to PlayStation. And now we have news that it's headed to Steam. It was originally exclusive on Origin, EA Origin, which is their storefront and home base on PC. And along with this was numerous game titles that were also exclusive to Origin on PC coming over to Steam. I find this news interesting because going into the next generation, I wonder if EA is seeing that they'd get greater returns having it available everywhere. I wonder if maybe Origin as a service isn't doing what they want it to do, right? Then moving it over to Steam, which is the biggest platform for PC. I don't know if either of you guys have an opinion on this. I just thought it was interesting that they're making this move now as we enter the next generation of kind of making their stuff readily available to the PC gaming audience in general, you know?
Yeah. I agree with you, actually. It seems, honestly, like you said, most likely Origins isn't getting those kind of returns that they wanted throughout this generation. So I think kind of to start, fresh, start anew, they want to kind of prepare for next generation by bringing in, like, a slew of new players, a new player base, and expand on the people using the subscription service by bringing it to Steam, which, financially makes a lot of sense because, like you said, Steam is by far the largest, service for PC gaming. I mean, beyond the lion's share market. So, and I'm sure they've worked out, deals with, I'm sure EA's worked out deals with Valve in terms of making sure that their financial return from this deal would be, more than beneficial for them. So it'll be interesting to see the numbers too. Like if people subscribing will significantly climb after the service is released on Steam.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder.
Go ahead.
We've talked about before, like Steam takes whatever the percentage is, 30% of sales from the publishers or whatever who put their game on the platform, right? So I wonder if, EA being a bigger publisher, maybe they were able to negotiate a lower rate or something like that potentially. But I could see this also being kind of to contrast the Epic Game Store, where a lot of people are kind of upset when games are exclusive on that platform specifically. I don't really have a problem with it myself, but maybe EA is trying to do the opposite, get in more places, right?
Yeah, that's always the exclusivity thing has always been odd, and we've talked about it at length that on PC you just have to download another client, whereas with console you have to make a $300+ purchase, right? If something is exclusive. So I've always found that argument of being, I get it, but it's always rang kind of odd to me. The other thing here is we've talked about how EA Access, how that's going to combat against Xbox Game Pass, right? I wonder if maybe we see a collaboration there where EA kind of works with Xbox to bring some of those titles to Game Pass, and if they get a larger cut from it, who knows. The next bit of news, in your Twitter header, Alissa, I noticed that you had Pokemon. You had the 3 starters from, I think, the Alolan region.
Yeah,
I'm a huge Pokemon fan as well. I think Dom is more lapsed than both of us, but we got some news regarding the new DLC Isle of Armor for Sword and Shield. Some interesting stuff. So it's going to be coming out June 17th, which is a bit earlier than most people anticipated. Most people thought it was going to come towards the end of the month. On top of that, we got the first look at the Galarian Slowbro, which was partially teased because when the DLC was announced, anybody who purchased Sword or Shield got the opportunity to obtain a Galarian Slowpoke, which is pretty much a Slowpoke with a yellowish tail. And one of the cooler parts, I know you as a Gen 1er, Dom, we got the information on the Galarian versions of the legendary birds from the Kanto region, that being Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres. And their forms are not going to be their normal selves. So Articuno is no longer ice type. It's going to be a psychic and flying. Zapdos trades in the electricity for a fighting flying dual type. And Moltres trades in its fire for dark and flying. There's plenty of other information, so if you want to know more about the DLC specifically in terms of Pokemon that were missing from the National Pokédex when the game originally released, as well as some of the new legendary Pokemon that you'll be able to get your hands on, definitely check it out. I'm excited. This is going to be a nice palate cleanser for me as we get towards The Last of Us Part 2 to have some Pokemon DLC to get into. Alissa, how do you feel about this DLC? Are you planning on getting it? Are you interested?
Well, first, I'll tell you that I pre-ordered it.
Awesome.
Yeah, so, I mean, I've been literally playing Pokemon since Gen 1, since I was a little kid. And Pokemon is one of my favorite franchises ever. It's actually kind of a comfort franchise for me. So I know when they actually just broke the news of the release date, I was absolutely ecstatic, you know. And it's kind of nice getting something that like comforting and lighthearted, you know, especially dealing with current events. So I know I am absolutely looking forward to playing this. Like, I've been so excited for months.
One thing we didn't mention too is this is a different approach for Pokemon. Normally we get the third version of the game, right, that comes with added bonus content, mostly end game content, right, and it's a new package to purchase. Whereas this is, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the first time they've done standalone DLC that doesn't require a full-on purchase of a new game. Yeah, and it's partially probably due to the Switch platform, right? I'm excited to see how expansive this is. I think the pricing was pretty justified. I pre-purchased as well. I'm with you. It is a comfort food to me. It's, you know, people often complain that the game doesn't evolve enough, and there is validity to those claims, but it is a franchise that I know what I'm getting whenever a new one comes out. And to some people that might be a negative, but to me, it is that comfort food. It is something I know I can come back to and just have a good time with. So I'm with you on that 100%. Dom, I remember us talking about Kingdoms of Amalur, but I don't remember have you played it?
So for I think 10 hours or so, I bought it on PC like years ago, but never got anywhere close to finishing it. So this next news piece that you're about to get into, I'm pretty excited for.
Yeah, so it's definitely one of those games that I heard great things about and never got around to. And what we're talking about is Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. Via a Microsoft leak, we have news of a remaster titled Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning. And it's appeared on the Microsoft storefront. Along with screenshots of the game is a release date of August 18th, 2020. It will be $40 and will release on Xbox One, PS4, and PC. THQ Nordic will be the publisher, whose spokesperson confirmed the validity of the leaks. I find this interesting for two reasons. One, not only do we have a second remaster coming out in August alongside Mafia Remastered, it leaked literally the same way. If you guys remember, the Mafia leaks happened because of a Microsoft store page, which is really funny. I'm kind of bummed that it's not also coming out on next-gen consoles, but at the same time, with how open Xbox has been with backwards compatibility, I'm assuming you'll be able to play this probably on your Xbox Series X as well. I'm intrigued as to how well this holds up or not. If you're unfamiliar, listeners, what happened with Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning is Curt Schilling, who is a Hall of Fame baseball player, created the studio called 38 Studios, I believe, and they went bankrupt and kind of got sued by the state of Rhode Island, and the rights for Kingdoms of Amalur got sold off to THQ Nordic. So that's why they're the ones publishing it now. Yeah, I'm interested in this game. Dom, you said you are as well. Alissa, have you played Kingdoms of Amalur? Are you interested in maybe checking out this remaster?
Well, I've actually never played this title before, but
okay.
Yeah, I have to admit, the way it looks, I would definitely love to try it out. I'm always pretty much open to these kinds of titles, so, I would definitely, and I'm always open to RPGs. I mean, I tend to go more towards JRPGs, but a good Western to me is, I'm definitely eager to go with that as well. So I love to see why it's such a classic among players.
Yeah, it's such a cult classic too because it didn't sell particularly well, but people who have played it love it and talk about it so highly.
Yeah, its strength is definitely in the combat. It's very actiony and fast and it feels really tight and good. It's kind of like one of the original God of War games. It's kind of got that action feel to it, but more varied, like you might find in an RPG.
Yeah. I wonder if this is them dipping their toes to see if there's enough there to do a follow-up sequel. Because I do think if this game sells well enough, THQ Nordic, we know that they have a heavy thumb in terms of greenlighting stuff, right? They have so many games in development they've talked about, and none of them have come out yet. So if this sells well enough, I could totally see them greenlighting a follow-up project. Screenshots are fine and well, but I think we need to see this running to see how extensive the remaster is, if it is just an upgrade in visuals or if there's some modernizing in terms of the mechanics, So as more information becomes available, we'll see. The last thing I forgot to mention, it's only going to be $40, which is good. It's always weird when these remasters, if they're not done really well, if they're not a full-on remake, they come out at 60, So looking at you, Link's Awakening. Even though I paid 60 and loved every moment of that game, but Jesus, Nintendo. So that's it for that story. The last thing is another leak, also having to do with Xbox. Xbox's new store layout. So the new Xbox store design, codenamed Mercury, has leaked. The updated look will roll out to both Xbox One and Series X. It features a more open and less cluttered design that makes information clearer and more readable. Obviously, it's unclear whether this new design approach will find its way into the rest of the next-gen consoles' UI and navigation, or if it's simply for the storefront. But I thought it was pretty neat. I don't know if either of you had a chance to check it out. As somebody who actively uses my Xbox, I'm not as frustrated with the storefront as most people are, but it definitely needs updating. And from what we're seeing because it's actually a leaked video with the images as well, it looks cleaner, it looks more modern, it looks more futuristic, and I do think a problem with both PlayStation and Xbox is their storefronts have become so cluttered, it's hard to get the information you specifically want, and I do think it's time that we reach a design approach where less is more, right? So, I don't know if you guys had a chance to see it, and if you guys have opinions on it or experiences with, these storefronts being cluttered at all. Alissa?
So I'm a bit more familiar with the PlayStation 4 storefront, and I have to agree. I think one of the major negatives of it is it's extremely cluttered. It's extremely difficult to navigate and, like you said, find what you need to find. And from what I have, dabbled with the Xbox Ones, I feel like to a lesser extent they did suffer from that same issue. So when I'm looking at the new formatting, it looks absolutely gorgeous. Like, I love it. I hope that once you dive into it, it's just as intuitive as it looks. But I think so far, like you said, this is a great step in the right direction. And what I hope is that when this releases, this will push Sony to finally update their storefront again and make it much easier to navigate. So I'm going to say this. I think it was much easier to work with on the PlayStation 3. I don't know what happened, but as soon as like it kind of got into the end of the PlayStation 3 life cycle, when it's PlayStation 4, they just updated and it was absolutely atrocious. And so I really hope that they take a leaf, a page out of Microsoft's book here and decide to actually overhaul their own.
Yeah, I mean, another point too to this, Dom, maybe you have a perspective on this, is the storefronts and the UI in general should be faster with next gen because they're both going to be running SSDs now too, right? So along with these updated designs, we should have less stuttering and hiccup, we hope at least.
Yeah, I actually rarely ever, I don't think I've ever actually even bought anything from the PlayStation actual storefront on the console. And I rarely go in there at all. The few times I have, it's not great. You get a lot of big ads, a lot of big like, this is the new game that came out this week, big poster type things, and I don't know. I probably couldn't. If I ever used it, I would search for something specifically. I don't like the way they have everything set up. Xbox, I found even I go in there even more rarely. So I pretty much exclusively buy stuff on my phone on the PlayStation app, and then even like start the download from there too,
which is probably the smarter way to go with how convoluted both of these storefronts have been. Probably the easiest place to do it is via the phone app.
Yeah, and I've gotten really used to it. The phone app isn't great for PlayStation either. I mean, it's gotten better. It still has some issues, but it's good enough. But yeah, I mean, it's good that Microsoft is making these kinds of improvements too. So yeah, hopefully that, like you guys mentioned, pushes Sony to do the same thing, because even though I'm not an avid user of the console storefront, this is it's good for everybody.
Well, yeah, and then if the design approach goes towards the whole system UI, right, of the places you do navigate, the home menu and all that stuff, Modernize it, make it clean.
That I guess I do have a good perspective on. And Jared, you might cringe when I say this, but like I've gotten really used to the PS4 UI, like not the store, but the actual, where the games are and everything. And I adore that. Very much, it's a lot like the Switch. The Switch is like even more simple. But the Xbox UI, man, I just can't stand it.
I think all of that's based on what you load up and play every day, right? Because you get used to it and you understand shortcuts and all that stuff. Because as somebody for me who I own a PlayStation 4, I played Final Fantasy VII Remake, but I rarely turn on that thing. I play it for the big exclusives, and I'm not lying when I told you it took me about 15 minutes to find where my active downloads were to see how much more time I needed for it to finish downloading, because I'm not familiar with PlayStation at all. Oh man. And it is preference. Like, I really don't like the way the PlayStation home menu and all that stuff set up. But I guarantee you, like you, people who use it every day, or at least more often than I do, have fallen in love with it. And it's just, preferences. But both of them on Xbox and PlayStation should at least work in a very consistent, and high quality manner. So, I think that's pretty much it for the quickie news. Let's get into these topics. So the first one, I wanted to talk about our favorite black characters in gaming. And I think this conversation will work twofold, because we obviously want to put a spotlight on our favorite black characters and why we love them and the games they're in. But it'll also bring up the idea and the fact that there aren't a whole lot to choose from. I mean, if I'm being honest, when I was starting to do my research, because, we play so many games that I had to go back through my mind of the games I've played, right? And
yeah, exactly.
It's hard to find a lot of black characters in games. It really is. And some of the characters I found, I didn't even really realize were black. For instance, one of the honorable mentions, I'll just get into it now. This isn't one of my personal picks, but Alex Vance from Half-Life. I'm not a huge Half-Life person. I've seen Alex Vance, the picture of her, and I've never registered her as being a black character. I'm assuming she's biracial. I'm totally unclear of that, but yeah, it's weird that, she's not the main character, right? It's the guy who holds the crowbar, correct?
In the
you played
first
Half-Life,
two,
right?
She's the main. Yeah.
Alissa, sorry, what were you saying?
Oh no, I was just saying that she's the lead character in the new VR expansion, the game that they released. So she finally gets her protagonist role in there. But yeah, and she's one of the companions in the original too.
That's tough because it's a VR title, so like how do you market that too, because it's not like a third person game or something? Because during the whole marketing for Half-Life Alyx, I never really saw her, you know what I mean? Which is odd if she's the main character. I guess we'll shift to our favorites. I do have honorable mentions I want to do at the end, but I'll go first and we'll kind of go round robin style, so I'll talk about one and then Alissa and then Dom, and we'll kind of do that. I asked everyone to come prepared with, around 5, give or take, maybe more, maybe less. So the first one I want to talk about, and we might all have this on the list, who knows, are Lee and Clementine from Telltale's Walking Dead.
Of course.
Yeah, Clementine's one of my favorite video game characters, period, regardless of race. I just love her story arc. It's unfortunate what happened to Telltale from the top down, but they really hit it out of the ballpark, especially with that first season of, Lee as this criminal, going and finding this girl and taking care of her and showing that, regardless of his past life, he is a good person, he's a good man, and did everything in his power to protect her. And God, it's so heart-wrenching. Some of the best storytelling in video games, period, I've experienced. Yeah, I love them both so much.
I had both of them too on my list. So.
Yeah.
Me too.
Easy go-to. Since I already mentioned them, do you guys have anything else you want to add to that about them being some of your favorites?
I guess.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I'll just echo again what you mentioned about Clementine specifically, is going through the 3, and actually I haven't played the final season of The Walking Dead. I need to get around to that, but going through each of those seasons, you kind of like get to be there along the way with Clementine as she grows up, which is really cool. And obviously it's a zombie apocalypse, and there's the classic tropes of things that she has to deal with, but still, like, it's kind of like a TV series where you're going through after so many years of getting to know these characters, you kind of start to you grew, with them a little bit and were part of what they're experiencing. I mean, through the game or whatever, of course. But yeah, so that was something that was cool with Clementine. But in that first season, especially, like her and Lee, and their dynamic, and then the ending just kind of like just rips your heart out of your chest. But
yeah. Alissa, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, so as for me, I think one of my favorite parts about the dynamic is, well, in general, I'm such a big sucker for a male character who ends up taking in a little kid and they become like a father figure, and you get to see that relationship unfold.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think what I loved especially with these two is that it was so refreshing, because you never see that with Black characters. And the fact that both of them are, in fact, Black, and you got to really see that genuine love and care and affection between them, and see how that relationship grows. And it was really beautiful, honestly. Like, it's so touching. As you said, it's honestly one of the best narratives in gaming, period. And there's some of the best characters. And they're just so well written, well developed. And I absolutely adore them, which is, of course, what makes the ending of season 1 just so heart-wrenching. And then after that, watching Clementine have to, grow up so quickly. And you get to see that unfold because of the world that she's in, and how terrified you are of her, too. Even though she's gotten so strong, she's still so young.
Yeah. Oh, it's such an incredible game. Oh, man. Love it so much. I guess, Alissa, it's your turn now. Who's next on your list, but behind or maybe near Lee and Clementine?
So you might have this on your list too, but I have to say Barrett Wallace from Final Fantasy VII.
Okay.
I adore him. I know his original design in the original PS1 game, it did have the problem of being pretty stereotypical. However, his character himself, I mean, literally has one of the best character arcs in that game, bar none. I mean, once again, that trope of seeing him caring for his adoptive daughter Marlene, seeing that softer side, and then seeing just how passionate and driven he is, and especially in Remake, when they do an excellent job with the voice work and seeing his actual mannerisms and everything, just how driven he is. The fact that he went through so much unimaginable tragedy, and he lost his arm, and he took his disability and he used it to empower himself by putting this gun on it and aiming it right at the organization, the company that was responsible for this, and that he fights so tirelessly against that company. And it's just, he's just such a great nuanced character. And as you go along, even with the original game, as you go along, you just find out more and more about him, his backstory, his relationship with Marlene's biological father. It's just, he's an absolutely incredible character. So I adore him.
So
Man.
You're actually going to be disappointed in me, Alissa, because so first of all, I don't have the perspective of the original game. I never played it. So I can't compare Barrett in the new one to Barrett in the old one. I just know Barrett in the new one, right?
Okay.
And I'm also, like we mentioned at the top of the podcast, I'm not somebody who is... JRPGs aren't the genre I magnetize to, right? So I don't think I'm as forgiving as somebody who's a fan of the genre is, right? As, I'm pretty strong into first-person shooters, and I can likely be more forgiving of them than somebody who isn't super into them, right?
Right.
For me, playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, I found Barrett to be a bit of a caricature, but what I will say is I agree with you that the voice acting is phenomenal. I think the voice acting in that game, period, is phenomenal. His relationship with his daughter is awesome. And I do think he grows, and I do think they did a really good job of showing that throughout the game. Even at the beginning, when he's complaining in the elevator, and he sees that Cloud is calm, cool, and collected, and he kind of reserves himself too. He's like, oh, I don't need to overreact here. I need to understand what's happening, right? What I do hope is that maybe he fleshes out even more in the sequel we're going to be getting. Because I did fall in love with all of the characters. It just... Barrett to me struck a chord that didn't really vibe with me necessarily. But like I said, I don't have the perspective of the first one, you know? And maybe if I did, I would see the huge difference that they made. But yeah, I'm sorry. He's not on my list, unfortunately.
No. That's not nothing to apologize. I mean, you actually brought up some valid criticisms, and it was a lot of other black gamers brought that up too about him, about how he's presented. Like the fact that, you know, despite that he is a very nuanced, deep character with a lot of complexity, yeah, there are certain things about him that do, you know, when you first meet him, are pretty stereotypical. And I do think that is something that Square could absolutely work on in the future. I remember in particular, I was reading something on Twitter. People were talking about a fan translation that was done for the original Final Fantasy VII and how they translated Barrett's dialogue, which was like more faithful to how he was originally portrayed in the Japanese version. So you didn't have like that sort of almost minstrel kind of sound to his dialogue. You know, it made more sense, and it ended up kind of being almost like poetic sounding. Like it worked really well for his character. And I'm reading it, I was kind of like, man, I kind of wish that they did that with the script writing.
That so just poor localization, right, is what it sounds like. Well, maybe not poor localization,
you know,
but
that,
like, yeah.
I know what you mean. Yeah, like it's much better than the original one, but they still need, you know, they still have to consider the work that they need to do on that.
Also, the funny thing with him that I find with all the characters is like all the regular civilians in that world are like normal height, and all of them are like at least 6'5". But his gun arm is dope. Like the combat in that game is awesome, and he has some of the coolest abilities. So, yeah, shout out to Barrett. Not personally my favorite, but the thing too is I think that's important that you have a prominent black character like that in a JRPG that's as popular as Final Fantasy, right? And the franchise has had, from what I've seen, especially doing the research for this, they've had a tendency to have at least one semi-prominent black character, but Barrett obviously with Final Fantasy VII rings as the most popular and notable. Dom, what's your first one off the board outside of Clementine?
Barrett did not make my list either, but we talked about him enough, I guess. I'm going to go first with, probably because it's freshest in my mind, from Jedi Fallen Order, Serre, and I think her last name is
Sierra Junda?
Yeah, Sierra Junda.
Yeah.
She was fantastic. So I really loved that game overall, and all the characters were really well done. The main character, Cal, was actually kind of like there was nothing wrong with him. He just wasn't, you know, kind of the least interesting, which is not necessarily, you know, a negative. But I found like Grease and Serre especially to be way more interesting because she kind of, especially like the way that game ended, without spoiling anything. But you don't get to play as her throughout the whole game. You don't see her in action, but you know she was a Jedi at one point. And you learn about stuff she had done in the past and stuff she regretted and mistakes she made and that kind of thing. But then at the very end, the very last like couple scenes of the game, you finally get to see her in action, and it is glorious what she does, and you really see like a raw kind of Anakin Skywalker kind of, you know, angry Jedi kind of thing come out of her at the end, and it was fantastic. That game was great, and she was really cool too. So
what I think with Star Wars 2 specifically, before her, the two most prominent black characters in Star Wars, in my opinion, would be Mace Windu, Samuel L. Jackson, obviously, and I forget the character's name from Rogue One, Forrest Whitaker's character.
Saw Gerrera.
Saw Gerrera. And they're kind of over the top a little bit, you know what I mean, in terms of their personality. They're very bombastic and kind of crazy, and I like that Sierra Junda is very human, and she has this character arc where you feel for her and you empathize, but at the same time you kind of get mad at her for her decisions, but you also understand why she made them. Yeah. And shout out to Deborah Wilson. So I had Sierra Junda on my list, but I also had, as it's a pair, a little bit of a cheat, Grace Walker.
Yeah, me too,
from
man,
Wolfenstein 2. Deborah Wilson also played her. She was dope, you know, and I think Deborah Wilson is kind of one of the and this is part of representation in general, is we talk about the Troy Bakers and the Nolan Norths and all these incredible voice actors, and I do think people need to start mentioning Deborah Wilson as one of the best voices in gaming, period, because Grace Walker from Wolfenstein 2 and Seer Junda from Jedi Fallen Order, those are some of the biggest games that release, big AAA titles, and she nailed those parts. Like, she kills it. I've loved her ever since her days on Mad TV, if people ever watch that, the sketch comedy show, the rival to SNL. She's always been awesome, so glad to see her getting great parts in video games.
Dude, yeah. Grace Walker was my next one. She is excellent. Like, because that game was fantastic, and it's a similar thing where the characters were all, a little bit over the top, but that's that world, and all the characters were great, but she is just fantastic. You meet her like halfway through, and when you meet her, it's just like, holy crap, like, this woman is crazy, and it's fantastic.
And the thing with that too is that game obviously deals with you trying to take down Nazis, right? And the parallels to today, in which we have these people standing up and being like, screw your intolerance, I am who I am. And in that game, she totally is, I'm black and I'm proud, and screw Nazis, I'm going to kill every last one of them. It's dope.
There is no patience. It's excellent.
Exactly. I love it. Did you play either of those games at all, Alissa? Are you familiar with those characters?
Yeah, I am actually. I actually haven't gotten around to playing those games, but I do know of them extensively. And yeah, no, I agree with you. They're absolutely phenomenal characters. Especially with Wolfenstein, because of how frank she is, honestly. Like, it's honestly very refreshing to have characters that don't beat around the bush, when it comes to racial issues, especially in this day and age. So
yeah, it's
I really appreciated that. And of course,
no, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
And that's okay. I was just gonna say too, also I'm a big fan of her design, and of course, like you said, the voice work for her is exceptional. So. Oh
yeah, we forgot to mention that she has one of the coolest afros. You know what I mean? It's like big and loud and awesome. So
yes.
Cool.
Exactly.
So my second pick, this is also I'm putting them together because they're from the same game, and this is crazy because people forget that this game only launched with 8 available characters, and these are 2 of them. So 1/4 of the players' choosable characters in the game. Bangalore and Lifeline from Apex Legends. Lifeline is obviously the healer. I believe she's of Jamaican descent. I could be incorrect on that. And then obviously Bangalore, who's if you're familiar with Overwatch, the Soldier 76 of Apex Legends. She's he's the soldier character, right? Jack of all trades, master of none. I personally main Bangalore in Apex Legends. Her toolkit allows you to deploy smoke and grenades, and it kind of fits my playstyle as somebody who comes from a Call of Duty Battlefield background. And I just like the representation in the game. Apex Legends kind of got applauded for it because they did such an excellent job of, the game launching with not only multiple black characters, but multiple black female characters on top of a gay character. Like, they made sure to represent in that game, which is astounding for a battle royale first-person shooter, right? Those aren't the type of titles that kind of do those things, and it was cool on Respawn for them to make that a sticking point. Like with Overwatch, I wish there was more narrative stuff, like an actual story campaign. You can get tidbits of their past and learn about them, but I would love to play through, a narrative like Titanfall 2, in which I'm playing as these legends, including Bangalore and Lifeline. They're really cool, and I appreciate that a game launched with, those 2 characters, because oftentimes people fight and claw for some type of representation, so I think that's really cool. I guess, Alissa, your turn. What's your second character you want to talk about?
I'm gonna mention Shinobu from No More Heroes and No More Heroes 2. I was honestly surprised when I first played the game, and I fell in love with it. And then I was completely surprised that, she was in there. I was like, wow, I did not expect a black female character in this sort of game. And she's really, really amazing. I love her design, first of all. I absolutely adore it. I love how well she just sort of fits in with this really messed up world of No More Heroes. The fact that not only is she a top assassin, but she's a high school girl on top of that. So, and honestly, I was very thankful too that that Travis didn't actually kill her.
Oh wow!
Which makes sense. Yeah, considering her age. I mean, you know, he kills almost, because that's the thing with the game, is that after he beats, you know, the character, he normally kills them because they're all assassins. It's hey. But it's great because it actually opens up for her to come in No More Heroes 2. And she's a playable character in that game. And she has a huge narrative, increased narrative presence in that game too. She's one of the, you know, the main characters. Like I said, you actually have entire segments of the game where you play as her, and she's absolutely phenomenal. I love that they kind of mix that sort of stone cold killer, but then she's like surprisingly naive as well, and you kind of see like the childishness come through. And she's voiced by Cree Summers, so amazing.
I'm not familiar. Who is that?
She's a very, very famous black voice actress. Like, guaranteed, if you watched Western cartoons in your childhood and there was a black female character, she was played by Cree Summers.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's an incredible actress with a really, really great range. So yeah. So I really, really love Shinobu, and I mean, she's just cool anyway. I mean, of course, she's a katana wielder. Her attacks are awesome. Like, I adore her.
That's dope. I have no experience in No More Heroes, so it's cool to hear you talk about it, and that character specifically. It sounds really cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Is No More Heroes one of your favorite franchises?
It actually is. I've been so excited for the upcoming third one that's come. Well, it probably won't release this year anyway, but I've been playing, of course, since the first one. You know, played second. I played this sort of in between game, not quite the third game. But that one is excellent as well. And of course, now I'm looking forward to this one. I love it because the game has this sort of like ridiculousness about it. Like, it's extremely audacious in its world, that it's completely messed up, but the characters, you can tell the developers, and they have a lot of fun with it, you know. Like, when you play the game, the NPCs even have like really interesting ways of speaking. Like, it's very over the top, almost poetic. And then, you know, the main character himself, Travis Touchdown, is a lot of fun. I mean, normally the type of character he is, he would be scum. I mean, but he's honestly a surprisingly good person, which is kind of funny. And his story is really engaging as well. Like, you actually end up rooting for him throughout every game that he's been in so far. So
that's cool. I'm thinking of maybe, you know, dabbling with it when the third one releases. It's piqued my interest. I love the teaser trailer with the superheroes, like aliens coming down. It was really well done. I really enjoyed it.
Oh yeah, absolutely, exactly. And that gives you a taste for that's what you're in for. And the game plays a lot of fun. It's very boss centric, which is really, really interesting. And I love it because every time you have a new boss, you never know what's going to come up next. It's always just this completely unique experience.
That's cool. Dom, what is it now? Third? Second? I lost track. I think third.
Yeah, not including Lee and Clementine. I guess third. So fifth otherwise. Anyway, this was another easy one. A character from Detroit Become Human, who's technically a robot or an android, but still an awesome character nonetheless. Marcus, and I don't know his last name, to be honest. He's played by, and they made him look like the actual actor too. And I can't remember the actor's name, but he's in a couple of TV shows and like some bigger movies, I think. But anyway, so in this game, there's 3 different androids who you play as, and it kind of switches between them. One of them is a woman who
Brian. Real quick, the actor's name is Brian Dechart. Dechart?
Oh,
something like that. His last name is it's Dechart, and I don't know if he's French or not. So it's Brian. Okay. We'll go with Brian Deschart, I think, is the safest.
But yeah, so in the game, one of the androids you play as is just a woman who's like, whose owner like beats her constantly, and she's just trying to survive basically. And then another is a really plain looking guy who's actually a cop android, and like he has a partner, and there's some interesting stuff. Connor, yeah. There's some interesting stuff that goes on between him and his partner, and how he eventually, you choose everything about the game, so it doesn't always end up the same way. But at least in my playthrough, you end up, getting the partner on your side who previously was really discriminatory against the androids. But then the third character who I found the most interesting was Marcus, who his owner was like a really out there kind of artist, older guy, and he always like encouraged Marcus to think for himself and explore his humanity. Because in this game, the androids are so realistic that you kind of inevitably come to the conclusion that they are human. Depending on what, everyone has a different definition of human, I guess, but that's the point of the game. But Marcus becomes, out of the three, is the one that basically ends up starting a rebellion among the androids. So some things happen, and he ends up not being with his owner anymore, not to spoil it, but he ends up finding this underground, basically, group of androids who are all kind of thrown away and rejected for various reasons, whatever it is, and he ends up becoming like their leader and leads an android revolution in futuristic Detroit. There's one scene in particular that like I'll always remember, is he ends up basically in a dump that's primarily filled with just old android parts, and he has to like put back together his limbs that are missing and certain components that he needs, and he's just digging through the trash of old androids and just piecing himself back together. And it's like raining, and I don't know, it's just really emotional, and he sees like some of the other androids partially working, but yeah, his character was just super interesting to me, especially compared to the other two in that game. But yeah, he was really well done, and overall I enjoyed that game, but certainly mostly thanks to him. So
awesome. Marcus was his name in the game?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another game I need to get around to playing. I haven't had a chance. Since we're going through our last round here, I don't want to spend too much time for me specifically talking about one character. I'm going to go through the rest of the names I have here that I listed. So Augustus Coltrane Cole, obviously from Gears of War. Very much a character, very much loud and bombastic, but I love him. He's awesome. His whole past of being like a professional, sports player and getting caught up in all of this. That's always been an interesting concept to me, because whenever you think about zombie apocalypses, they rarely talk about what would happen with a top flight athlete dealing with it, right? Because a lot of times they're way more capable of getting away or doing these feats that an average human couldn't. So I've always thought about like a 7 foot tall NBA player, how would they handle a zombie apocalypse? You know what I mean? Because they're so large, and it's always interesting to me to think about that stuff.
Well, I'll interject because he was the last one on my list too, and I love that character. And there's one particular mission, and I think it's Gears of War 3, where he's he finds himself on a football field and is having these flashbacks, and it's like it looks like he's remembering back to him being in a game, and he's like the running back or whatever. But then in real life, he's actually like running through the locust. That was incredibly cool.
Yeah, I love Coltrane. Next up, Jax from Mortal Kombat. Kind of like with Barrett having a gun arm, I always thought Jax was dope because he had the two metal arms, similar to like a Colossus from X-Men. One of the cooler characters in Mortal Kombat. And then honorable mention. So Sergeant Avery Johnson from Halo. Coach from Left 4 Dead. We talked about Alex Vance from Half-Life. Storm, which is kind of a cheat because she's a Marvel character, but she's been in a bunch of Marvel games, but Storm's still dope. Barrett, who we talked about. James Heller from Prototype 2. I never played any of the Prototype games, but he seems like a very prominent character when people talk about black characters in games. And then lastly, this is also kind of a cheat. Kratos isn't necessarily black from God of War, but he's voiced by Christopher Judge, who's an awesome, amazing voice actor. And I think he deserves to get his hat thrown in the ring because that performance in the latest God of War was tremendous. And Christopher Judge's voice and acting played a huge part in that. So I kind of wanted to mention that. Yeah, that's everything for me. Dom, you already said Cole was your last one. So, Alissa, what's your final one you wanted to mention?
My final one, and this was tough because there was so many. But I'm gonna say Aveline from Assassin's Creed Black Flag.
That was on my honorable mention that I forgot to say. Yep, Liberation.
Yeah, I mean, an absolutely incredible character. She has a great backstory. I thought it was a very interesting way to position her because she actually did come from a position of economic privilege in the sense that her family was rich. So she had a comfortable life at a young age. But then as she started getting older, she started seeing the various injustices, economic-wise, racial, all that. And she decided that she wasn't going to stand for it. And that was how she got into being a pirate because she was going to fix that herself. And I really, really love that. She has incredibly strong narrative, incredibly strong core as a righteous, moral character. And just playing as the game, kind of seeing like her character arc unfold. And she's just an incredibly compelling character. I guess my only thing is I wish she had gotten her own game versus being DLC for Black Flag. I mean, I would hope that in the future that we could have characters like her have an entire game to themselves because honestly, I think it would be incredible exploring the Caribbean and that full expanse of her as a pirate and other historical pirates during that time, how they would interact with her, dealing with all sorts of the issues, that plague, like the racial injustices and such. But she's an amazing character.
I mean, I'm wondering if they will go ever back to the world of Black Flag with the Kentways, right? Connors Kentways. I don't remember what their last name was. But if they did, I would love if instead of focusing on them, she did get a full game. As soon as that game came out, there was a real big push for people falling in love with her character, and she's often talked about up there with Ezio as one of the favorite characters of the series. And now, for me personally, my favorite character in Assassin's Creed is Cassandra from Odyssey. I absolutely love that character, and it seems like those three are always mentioned. It's Ezio, it's Cassandra, and it's Aveline. One character we forgot to mention as well that was in a pretty prominent game was the lead character in Watch Dogs 2, which also has the name Marcus. I completely forgot about him, partially because most people forgot about that game in general because it didn't sell very well. It didn't come out to great reviews, but I wanted to mention him as well. And this whole conversation was obviously meant to put a spotlight on our favorite characters, and there's plenty of awesome ones. But also, as we mentioned numerous times, there's not enough. It's hard to think about your favorite white game characters. You don't necessarily have to do a Google search because almost the majority of games you play, you're playing as a white person as the lead.
Exactly.
Yeah. So hopefully we see this in the future. A lot of the characters and voice actors we mentioned, hopefully they make a return in either standalone games or as primary prominent characters alongside other characters. We're starting to see a slow movement towards it. I mean, having Cassandra playable or even Aveline when she was in the DLC, that was kind of controversial at the time because, we mostly had male characters. So now hopefully we move towards a place where we focus on racial diversity and not just, gender diversity with the leads as well. So I guess now it's time for Alissa's topic. I want to, give you the reins to introduce it and let us know what exactly you want to talk about and why. So go ahead.
Okay, so as mentioned earlier, the topic that I wanted to discuss was character customization, and specifically in terms of black options. So just to kind of open up, when you're, and this could go for both of you, when you're playing, when you're engaging in character customization, how satisfied are you with those options that you have?
Honestly, the only thing I ever get really irritated at is they don't have my specific type of hair. But as somebody who's, a white passing biracial kid, I usually have all of the options readily available to look as close to me as a video game can without really worrying about it.
Yeah, I don't typically have really any complaints. I don't get too deep into those customizers that often. Maybe that's part of the conversation. Because I have pretty generic hair and features as far as I know. So it's usually like I can pick one of the preset faces, change the hair color to brown and do like a faux hawk or pompadour or whatever, and it's usually pretty good.
Well, so. And the thing is normally when we load a game, what is the default preset? It's a white dude, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I guess too, there's also a conversation of, some people make their character look like themselves and some people don't, right? That's also interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so the reason why, I kind of want to open that is because, in general, when you open that up, you're able to just kind of make whatever character you want, whether you want them to look like you or not, whatever you kind of imagine and you want to see, the options are pretty much there. So, among Black gaming circles, one of the biggest questions that we always talk amongst ourselves are how robust are the customization options for if you wanted to make a Black character. And when I'm talking about that kind of thing, like Black options, I'm referring to the range and accuracy of skin tone, hairstyles, facial features, voices, things like that. And unfortunately for us, most games do disappoint in at least one of those categories. So some examples is sometimes you'll have an issue where the skin tone is extremely limited. Like it'll be maybe like 4 choices, like one choice dark skin. Yeah. Exactly.
It's like white, a little bit darker white, a weird it's not Latino or Black. It's like somewhere in the middle that I've never really even seen that color. And then it's a Black skin tone that doesn't even match anything realistically either. It's very odd.
Yeah, exactly. And then those so you'll have games like that. And a big problem too will be that if you do have darker skin tones, a lot of the time they're not properly lighted. Lighting is something that is a huge issue for Black people or people in general with very dark skin, because, historically things like photography and, things like that, recording has always been made for people with light skin. So the lighting systems and how they record has been made to favor them, and it won't record Black skin properly. And that's an issue that's carried over into video games. A good example is if you play Black Desert Online. Have you ever heard of that game?
Mm-hmm. The Korean MMO, right? I think it's Korean?
That's the one. Yeah, exactly. So while they do have, pretty good options for customization, as soon as you put on a dark skin tone, it just completely drowns out facial features. Like, you can't see this person's mouth, their nose. It's very bad. And so of course, that's completely against how dark skin works, because in real life, light reflects off of dark skin. And you never see that, you almost never see that portrayed accurately in games. And, also too, it's very hard to even get very dark skin tones done realistically. I think a lot of games tend to kind of stop at a dark brown, and then that'll be, about the range. Another problem too is, of course, the hairstyles. Very, very little options for that. They'll always, and I hate this, they'll always have the joke giant afro that's not done properly. They'll maybe have they might have braids or dreads, and then those are pretty much your options. And then everything else are, straight hair options. And facial features is something that's even rarely represented properly. Being able to do thicker lips, wider noses, things like that. So even if you happen to have a dark skin, you still can't make them look Black, which actually I've realized is a problem for me because I'm light-skinned, and I can if I wanted to make a character look like me, I could never pick that option because they'll just look white. I can't give that character any Black features. So that's a huge problem with that too. And and I think the last thing that's the worst is that I think almost all games with customization don't seem to have black voice options, like actual voice actors, black voice actors doing the voices. I think the only game that I've personally ever played that had that was the first Dragon Age game. Was it Origins, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was the only game. I believe it was Cree Summers who actually did one of the preset voices, and I couldn't believe it. I've never ever played a game before that actually offered that, and honestly, since I haven't played a game that offered that, so that's something that's extremely lacking.
Well, so you think that it's
go ahead.
Sorry to cut you up. I think with these limited options, I would assume that two of the biggest issues facing it are, one, for some reason, a lot of these companies might think that the player base isn't full of as many black people as there actually are, right? So they're not playing to that because they're like, we don't really need to play to that, which is dumb. And also, I'm assuming that there aren't enough black leads in development houses that can speak up and make it a point of emphasis, right? There aren't a lot of black people in those positions to be able to kind of focus on making those changes, which also is an issue of there not being enough, black leads in video games, period.
Man, that's like a lot of stuff I would not have thought of in like 100 years, right? Especially lighting. I would not have ever considered something like that. But that's got to be like especially disappointing when you're talking about a character customizer. Like the whole point of it is supposed to be that you can make it look like actual people and different types of people, and it can't actually do that, especially when some of them are really good and really in depth, and technology has enabled that, but not many developers have put the time in to actually make it accurate, more representative.
And it's crazy how privilege even extends to video games, right? Like, we're white dudes, so we never really think of that. We never think of like, how is the lighting hitting this character, because we normally don't pick a black character. So it's like, you have to recognize the privilege you have even in that, of like being a white person, being able to create yourself in a game, so I think it's an important topic though, and I do think it's something that needs to be focused on. From my experience, I play a lot of sports games, Alissa. Like, I play like the annualized franchises, right? It's like Madden and 2K. And 2K definitely has a lot of customization options, black customization options, which makes sense because the player base for 2K, I would imagine, is predominantly black. You know what I mean? Because the fan base for the NBA as well is predominantly black. So they make it a point of emphasis to have, obviously, majority of the people in the game you play as are black, So it makes sense. And I was going to mention this during the when we were talking about our favorite characters. That's the odd thing too, is most of the times the most prominent video game characters you see are whatever athletes on the cover of the annualized sports title, right? Which shouldn't be the case. We should also see them on the cover of whatever the latest AAA Western RPG is, alongside that. So yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, because this is a perspective we don't have, and it's something, like Dom said, we don't think in a million years of like, oh yeah, my color of skin that I choose for my customized character doesn't have appropriate lighting. Never crosses our mind at all. You know what I mean? So, would you say that's the issue as well, as the lack of, diversity among development houses and having leads in position to make it a point of emphasis? Like, what do you think the issue is, and how do you think it could get fixed?
So, I think I think there are a lot of issues with that. I think, like you said, a major one is the fact that there just simply aren't enough black developers in the industry. Because honestly, even if you don't mean to, it's very easy to create an echo chamber. And I think that's what happens with a lot of these development companies. You look at them and they're extremely predominantly white, a lot of them completely white. And so, like you said, it's not a malicious a lot of the time either, but it's something you never consider because it's something that never impacts you. So you don't have that perspective. So it's not something that you think, oh, maybe we should try to focus on creating more of these black hairstyles. Maybe we should focus on presenting skin tone realistically and do the coloring properly and the lighting. Or maybe when we get voice actors to do the voices, we should have black people voice characters too, you know? And so I feel like you really have that huge blind spot. And I think another reason too, like you said, is of course the assumption that, you know, that the predominant audience of video games are white males, which we've seen. I mean, it's just simply not true. There's quite a sizable amount of people from all different groups who play video games and who deserve to see themselves reflected in both the actual fleshed out characters and of course in character creation options. People being able to play as themselves, or you know, and create that character, or if they want to just create a character of their dreams. Like if I want to, I should be able to create, you know, a dark skinned black woman with long like box braids or dreads or something like that, and know that her features, her skin, her the texture of her hair, her voice will represent black people. So I think honestly the biggest, in my opinion, the biggest thing you can do is not only hire more black devs, and also make sure that the work environment is sustainable and is non-toxic. That's another big problem too, I think. You know, not only do you have people, they just don't simply like look for black talent and they kind of overlook it. You do have a lot of nepotism in the industry. And then on top of that, even if you do have developers, you know, who's to say that the environment would be conducive to them being able to express themselves and speak out without risk of being retaliated against or being ignored or ridiculed or what have you. You know, I mean, is that work environment really made to embrace and encourage that kind of expression? So those are some deep seated issues in the industry that I think really have to be tackled before we'll see, I think, significant change in this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think you're dead on with everything you said. I think you're right in that, you know, not only is it important to hire more black people into the gaming industry, but make sure it's an environment where they feel that they can openly discuss maybe issues with the development they're having, where, you know, it's not going away, that represents everyone who's playing the games. I mean, to most publishers too, Alissa, you're kind of a double unicorn in that you're black and you're a female, right? Because to them, it's like, oh, you know, it's a totally in their blind spot. Sorry, Dom, what were you gonna say?
Oh yeah, and like even from a purely business or financial perspective, it's advantageous, right? Because I mean, wouldn't you want to try to expand your market and who you're selling your game to, right? By having more representation and offering, you know, adequate customizing features and all this stuff, like that's just going to make a larger group of people want to buy your game who might otherwise not, right? So there's long been like this kind of myth that, you know, intentional, you know, diversity is like not good for business for some reason, right? But I think it's like couldn't be more the opposite, right? Where like the more you do that, you're going to be better off from a financial perspective too. I think is worth, I guess, mentioning.
And it's never safe to completely assume what your audience is going to be for a product. Like, for instance, earlier today I tweeted, the day of recording, we're recording on June 4th, I tweeted a piece by Gita Jackson that titled "Why Black Men Love Dragon Ball Z." And it basically talks about, like, you know, this is a Japanese anime with mostly, you know, white Asian characters, and it discusses why the black community would love a show like that, right? Because I don't know if you were similar, Dom, but for me, I loved Dragon Ball Z growing up, but I realized that, like, a lot of times it was my black friends who I could engage with Dragon Ball Z conversations with more so than, like, my other friends. And I always thought that was interesting because, you know, I could relate to the people in Dragon Ball Z because they were white dudes. So it always fascinated me, like, I wonder why they're so into it. And it's really cool because there's conversations of how, like, you know, Goku's story kind of reflects, you know, the black struggle and all that stuff. And it's a really cool piece, and I highly recommend you go check it out. It's on my Twitter. Just Google Gita Jackson Dragon Ball Z and it'll pop up. I thought it was really cool. Another thing I wanted to mention is you put a couple links here that I think people should check out as well, Alissa, which is Dear Video Game Character Creators, You Still Need Work. This is over at Medium. I'll put it in the description of the YouTube video. Definitely go check it out, as well as the second one that's over on The Verge, which is titled Playing Red Dead Online as a Black Character Means Enduring Racist Garbage.
Yeah. I've heard
which is a whole other conversation of, the gaming community at large. Like, it could be another hour-long discussion. I appreciate you bringing up this topic, though, because it is all about perspective, and Dom and I couldn't have said anything really about what this means and what the issues are and stuff like that, so that's all it is listening and understanding other people and their perspective. So yeah, I hope these companies work towards that, because it's shitty that I can go in there and make my e-boy white boy haircut and make my character, and you have to deal with, well, what's the closest I can get to what I actually want to make, which sucks. Yeah.
At least I can make myself unrealistically buff and jacked. Right?
Yeah, give me those abs. We ran rather long with those topics, which is great, because obviously that's what matters. Those were important, talking about representation. So we don't have a whole lot of time to talk about what we've been playing, so I'll be rather quick with mine. So I've been playing Assassin's Creed. I read AC and I immediately thought, because of the Aveline discussion. Animal Crossing New Horizons. Been working on my island still, making it nice and pretty, just doing dailies. Like we talked about with Pokemon earlier, at least it's like a comfort food for me. I just like logging in, and it's an hour away from everything going on, and just be able to focus and chill, right? Which is cool. Call of Duty Warzone, been playing a lot of that with my friends. Once again, it's provided a good avenue for us to hop in and talk about these issues and have really serious discussions and frank discussions, while also making dumb jokes and playing a first-person shooter. And lastly, this was the biggest one. I finally got around to playing Gone Home. I know, a little late on this. Never played it. Played through it. I think it holds up really well for what it is. If you're not familiar, Gone Home is Fulbright's walking simulator that's disguised as a horror game, and it's really not that at all. It's a really beautiful story. Don't want to spoil it for people who haven't played it yet. Luckily, I was never spoiled. Don't know how.
Really?
Yeah. Really beautiful. Enjoyed it so much so that I completed the achievement list on it after finishing the game and rolling credits. Yeah, really awesome. I haven't played. What was Fulbright's follow-up? The one in space? Do you guys remember that?
Tacoma.
I need to get to that next, because I've heard good things. Not as good as Gone Home, but that's pretty much it for me. The only other thing of note is I finished Steins Gate, the anime, which is really cool. Yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Jared, you mentioned Animal Crossing being, relaxing, and I couldn't disagree more. I haven't turned it on in a month, and guess who showed up? Guess who showed up at my front door with a baseball bat, because I still owe him over 100,000 bells.
Tom Nook.
Tom Nook. No, I'm just kidding. I already mentioned last week I fell off of Animal Crossing, but I have been playing still. Nothing new to say about it. Star Wars Battlefront 2. I've won, just got to get to level 50 to get this last trophy, to get this platinum. And it's still a lot of fun. It's just a big grind to get all these levels. But I have been adoring that game the past few weeks especially. So talked about it so much already that I won't go on much longer.
Alissa, what have you been playing? You definitely will tell us about stuff that is not on our radar, which is dope.
No problem. So first one would be, because I did a review recently, I was playing Shantae and the Seven Sirens, which is a 2D platformer. It's an indie game from Way Forward. It's a very, very fun game. It's not very long, but it has a lot of great replayability because of all the how expansive each level is, and there's all these different alternate paths and just lots of things to explore. And I mean, it's beautiful. The sprite art is absolutely gorgeous. The colors are beautiful. It has a very fun plot. The characters are fun. So I really, really enjoyed that one. I keep going back to it. Final Fantasy VII Remake, because I think one of my favorite things to do, I love micromanaging. I'm one of those people. I'm one of those people that in Final Fantasy VIII, I love the junctioning system, because I loved really sitting there and micromanaging every single thing about my characters, like what magic would go for each stat and how I'm really I'm that person.
Into the
So
minutia.
exactly. So I love that in Final Fantasy VII remake that you really have the option to go in depth with how you customize, your materia, equipment, how you do the weapon customization, and trying to create like this sort of synergy between the two to create these really really great to really create like great equipment that enhances a character's class alongside like trying to figure out like the best abilities to use with that. It's just very in depth. So I always end up going back to that. And then lastly, I keep playing the mini games for Persona 5 Royal because they are so much fun. Like the darts mini game is an absolute blast. I mean, that's unfortunate. I wish that you could play it outside of like in game. So I actually had to put aside a save file just so I could play the darts mini game whenever I want.
Smart.
And then the other thing that I have been playing that you can play outside of the regular game is a card game called Tycoon, which is so much fun. I mean, it's a very simple card game. It's kind of an interesting mix of like poker and spades, and so it's very simple to pick up, a lot of strategy. And what makes it even more fun is how much effort Atlas put into making it super interactive. Like you have all these little extra voice lines and everything depending on like how you play your cards and how the other characters play the cards in those rounds. And it's just so much fun watching them like have these reactions, whether you're winning or losing, or if they happen to win, or if they get completely cleaned out by everyone else. So that's just endless fun to me. So that's stuff like that's what I would have been playing.
So
we gotta hit this Persona 5 game, Jared. Like we gotta.
So yeah, I have this question. We had another guest on earlier in the year, and I asked their advice, and I want your advice too, Alissa. So I own Persona 5, the base game, right? Haven't gotten it to yet, but I own the game. I've struggled with, do I start that? Because I don't want to pay $60 for Persona 5 Royal, because for me it's like, I wish they would also let people who already own Persona 5 like buy it at a reduced rate or something, So part of me doesn't want to buy another $60 game when I currently already own Persona 5. So do you think, should I start Persona 5, or should I just wait for a sale and just wait for Persona 5 Royal?
Okay, so in that case, and this is something I outlined in my own review. The thing with Persona 5 and Royal as well is that, especially until like maybe the 5th dungeon, it's a very, very dense game. I mean, you'll spend a lot of hours going through it. So I can't recommend, unless you really love the game that much, I cannot recommend you play through the entire Persona 5 and then later on play Royal. So how I feel is if price, which is very understandable, is an issue for you, but you do want to play Royal, it might be a good idea to wait for a sale, because eventually, there have been a few sales already, and eventually it will go down further in price. But if you really just want to have the Persona experience in general and like, get engaged in the combat and in the plot lines and everything, then Persona 5, you having that already, I think you could safely play through and still have a very, very good experience. So it really depends on whether you want to wait for that additional content, which to me is excellent. Like I love all of the new stuff that they added to the game and how they fleshed it out more. The third semester, of course. So, but that just depends on the kind of experience you want and what you're willing to pay for that.
And it doesn't hurt that the base game is also incredible, right? Not just So, it's been a great podcast. I really enjoy having you on. Your first time, definitely not your last. We want to have you on again later in the year. But before we close out, can you please let listeners know where they can find you on the internet?
Okay, so of course, as I stated earlier, I'm a senior weekend writer at DualShockers. So you can, of course, find my works on DualShockers.com. Not only do I write news articles, but I write editorials, I have interviews, previews, reviews, all sorts of things. It's a great site in general if you want like really great up to date news from an independent source. I also co-host a podcast called Mega 10 Marathon, which is basically me and, two others will usually, we'll run through Persona or Shin Megami Tensei game, and we'll run through the entire game. We'll also discuss the mythology. We'll delve into the plot more and the characters and sort of analyze and pick apart how well it functions within, the entire narrative. So if you're a big fan of, Shin Megami Tensei franchise, or you happen to love Persona games and you want to learn more about, the original franchise they branched off from, definitely recommend, giving us a listen. I think it's a very, very fun podcast. So,
Very cool.
What's your Twitter handle, by the way?
So my Twitter handle is at ajames347. So, definitely if you want to just chat me up about anything really, like, RPGs, just video games in general, feel free to at me and we can have a whole conversation. I love chatting with people, so.
Yeah, once again, we love having you. Normally, this is a part of the podcast where I would shill ourselves out and talk about our own links and all of that, but given everything that's currently happening, I thought it was a good opportunity to shout out some Black content creators that you can go and listen to after this podcast, outside of Alissa, obviously, and DualShockers. Also, by the way, I think most people hear DualShockers and they assume it's a PlayStation-centric site. It's not. They cover everything, just so you know. I loved their your guys' joke when the DualSense was announced. They're like, oh, guess we're DualSensors now. Thought that was really funny. So yeah, these Black creators, you may have heard of some of them, you may have not have heard of others. But we have Khalif Adams, who hosts the Spawn on Me podcast. I want to specifically mention the last episode they had, which was a roundtable discussion with fellow Black content creators, including some of the other names I'll list. And they just had an open dialogue about the current situation, with Black Lives Matter. And a specific topic they got into is how a lot of these non-Black creators are choosing a side in terms of either talking about it realistically and making a change, or avoiding it so they don't lose sponsorships or ad deals, right? So I thought that was a really interesting discussion because, a lot of times, unfortunately, the biggest content creators on these sites are non-Black folks, and it is up to them to use those platforms to speak for those who are unheard. So I thought it was a really fantastic podcast. Definitely go check it out. He's also had the pleasure of recently being on Podcast Unlocked for IGN and stuff, and he's an awesome guy, really funny. Don't eat his ribs, I guess, according to some people. There's a beef going between a couple of creators about their ribs. It's really funny. Next up, Blessing Adeoye Jr. Of Kinda Funny, formerly of OK Beast. Really dope. It also has been in a lot of these discussions recently. You can see him on Kinda Funny Games Daily almost 4 to 5 times a week on their daily news show. He's younger, so he kind of skews towards that demographic in terms of gaming, but I think he does a really good job of going back and trying older games, and it's just a really dope younger voice, especially a Black voice to have in the industry right now that's prominent is really important, so definitely check him out. Rihanna of What's Good Games, she was a new addition to the team. What's Good Games is an all-female gaming podcast, and she was the most recent addition. She also works for Xbox, and she was also featured on Inside Gaming this week, which is Rooster Teeth's gaming news brand. You can follow her at Rihanna Tweets Now. Really great follow. And lastly, which is something Alissa's a part of, which is Black Girl Gamers. You can follow at Black Girl Gamers. It's a community focused on heightening Black women's voices in gaming. Since you're a part of it, you want to say a little bit more about it real quick, Alissa?
Yeah, so Black Girl Gamers is basically a group, of a lot of Black women in gaming, whether we're content creators, developers, journalists, etc. And we, come together, share resources, help promote each other, things like that. So you'll mainly see them if you go on Twitter, at blackgirlgamers.com. And you can see them as they promote some of their Twitch streamers. And you'll be able to see their content as they go live, things like that. We also sell merchandise that helps support our causes. And in general, we try to inform people as much as possible about Black issues in gaming when we can, as well as helping to uplift other voices of Black women in gaming and give them that voice to express themselves and be promoted. In the case of this kind of industry where, often we're pretty much drowned out. So it's a really, really great group. Definitely, give us a look over at Twitter. And if you can, support us in our cause, check out our content. We do a lot of great work. So
awesome. Once again, thank you for joining us. We appreciated having you on. I can't wait to have you on again. Maybe by the time you come back on, I will have finished Persona 5. That'll be interesting.
Yeah.
That game's long. That's the only thing I'm fearful of. I know people tell me that game's very long, but worth it.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you guys next week. Hopefully Chris is back at that point. Thank you guys for listening. Catch you guys next time. Bye.